So like I mentioned, today we have all sorts of specialists on, and what we're going to do is first I'm going to open up to see if you guys have questions for yourself to get things primed. If not, we have a couple of them that we've gotten over the past week to get things going, but what we would really appreciate is to hear from all of you, and just have an opportunity as we are getting towards the end of planting. Some of us are still in the middle, but we've gone ahead and started to see what burning questions you have or issues that you would like to help us diagnose things and help you out live, or talk about just general trends. So at this point, I want to stop sharing and let's see if we have any questions. I guess I'll just get it started then. I did have a question this past week I thought was very interesting, and it was like an agri-service place that was noticing an increase in the amount of loads that they're failing because of treated seed inside a load of grain that's being taken to be sold. This person said overwhelmingly it seemed to be soybeans and wheat that they were having issues with, and it wasn't just that place. It was actually, he had called around to some of the other agribusiness in the area, and they were having similar issues. And so Chris DeFonso luckily got my phone call of what's the law with this? What's going on? So Chris, what'd you find out?
Yeah, so I actually teach the pesticide class on campus, and it's a very easy answer. And that is that there is a zero tolerance for that. So when a seed is treated, it's called a treated article. And usually that's not being done on farm. Somebody is treating for you and they're seeing the label for, say, cruiser. And on that label very clearly, it has warnings like do not use as feed or for foodstuffs, which means in the channels of trade. Don't feed to animals like wildlife. Don't feed it to cows. That's a feed through. And you as a farmer might not see that, but that information is then on the bag tag label. So the bag tag is a legal document as well. That's your legal document on that treated seed. So there is a zero tolerance for that. And of course, it's very obvious because it's pink or it's purple. It's got the seed treatment on it. So I suspect that this isn't knowingly being done, but maybe there was some in a bin, or more likely in a wagon or in an auger. And that means you gotta, and you're rushing, you want to get stuff in, there's good prices, you're bringing stuff to the elevator, and then you're using that to take new seed out to the field. And there's still a zero tolerance for that. Also, when you have a wagon, you've put old treated seed in it or something, that should probably be power washed. Not near a stream, of course, because there's that seed treatment kind of coming off. So I would clean those wagons and augers out. I know it's hard, everybody's rushing, but those little individual kernels or beans, then someone sees them as you drop off at the elevator and your whole load is like kicked out, or it contaminates a much larger load. So it's zero tolerance because the amount on that seed, it's a lot compared to what would then be allowed downstream at harvest, which you wouldn't find any residue hardly at all. So it'd be like having one apple that you just loaded up with a spray and then plucked it and left it at Meijer in the apple bin. It's like there's a lot on there compared to what would normally be allowed. And it's just not allowed. It's on the bag tag.
So what I understand both legally and financially is if you contaminate your own or it gets dumped and it contaminates others, that farmer is legally liable for the cost of all of that damaged grain.
And again, it's hard if it's a wagon or an auger, a lot of little cracks and crevices there, but it's worth the extra half hour it took to do a clean out. Or in a perfect world, you'd have a separate set of equipment, which you probably don't, but you wouldn't be handling both with the same, or normally at the same time, you often wouldn't. But this year, I think people are selling stuff out of bins and all that and just getting mixed up. Another dirty secret side of seed treatments, you guys. So
yeah, I guess this was the most common time that they find that farmers are struggling with making sure things are completely cleaned out.
Because everybody wants to plant, want to get stuff in the ground, and you're not Okay, we'll move on to other things here.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
hot
So
topics.
slow down. All right. So I have another question. What is the best way to handle herbicide drift from neighboring fields?
I guess I can jump in on that one. So a lot of it depends, so that as far as, you can always try to work it out yourself, but for any kind of standard report, you would need to contact the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and then they would have an investigator come out if you want to go that far. So any contact, they will send out an investigator and they'll do kind of an assessment, and then that's when they will talk to the person that would have drifted. The other option would be to, if you feel comfortable, talk to that person yourself to see if you can get it worked out just between you two. So I guess it's kind of, what kind of a relationship you have with that person and which direction you want to go.
All right, thank you, Christy. It looks like we had a question about that pictured this app, and I would say I think Erin's helping that person. It is an app that says it's like paid for, but you just have to opt out of it every time. And so if you listen to her presentation, you wanted to download the Picture This app, you just need to get on your app store and download that.
That's right. That's one of sort of the caveats of using it for free, right? They're going to try to get you to pay for it. And I can't remember if it's $25 or $30 a year to have the version that's not going to try to trick you every time. But you just have to look for either the gray X in the top right corner or the continue with free version underneath the big button that says continue with paid version. And it should give you an option to back out if you accidentally push the wrong button, right? You're going to have to approve it through Google Play Store or the Apple Store. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out, I put the MDARD pesticide complaint line number in the chat too, if anybody needs that.
Thank you. Very thorough, Erin. We appreciate that. And I would echo what Christy said. I always encourage them, if they have a good relationship with that neighbor, to maybe discuss things with them. But unfortunately, the question the answer a lot of times is no, I don't know that person at all. And so those are the two options. All right, moving on to our next question. Can we keep treated seed for next year planting? I had a farmer that in a rush left some in his planter for wheat. He doesn't use it for anything else, right? That piece of equipment's just for wheat. And so he asked me if he could use it this year, and actually did test the germination for him. And the germination was still 97%. And so after discussing things with Dennis Pennington, he felt comfortable, saying that it was okay to go ahead and plant that, although it was not a huge amount. So any of you guys have any comments about that?
Is Manny on today?
Yeah.
Monica? I don't see
Oh,
him.
he was. Did he get bumped?
I know that in soybean seed, it's usually iffy. Is Mike Staton on today? I don't see him either.
I am on the call. I just took me a while to unmute. Yes, I mean, you can save it, but you have to be aware that the efficacy of the seed treatment is going to be reduced for the following year. It has been, I think I'd have to go back and look at this, but I can look at it and get back with folks later in the call. But there was some work done out in Iowa where they tested untreated seed and they tested treated seed after a year of storage. And I can't remember the exact outcome, but I can find that. But I thought that the treated seed actually declined in germination faster than the untreated seed. But I need to verify that and get back on with an answer to that.
This is Manny. I had to step away for a minute. I agree with Mike. I mean, you can keep it, but yeah, there are concerns with the efficacy of it next year, right? So I think it's good to talk with your seed dealer on that end. And I remember looking at that article that Mike is talking about. So it does go down. I mean, it's not really bad. So in theory, one can use it, but I would, prefer not to, again, keeping a seed. It depends on what sort of conditions you're keeping that seed, right? Where is it sitting? What sort of temperature and moisture it's getting to? So it's not ideal, but again, if it has to be, then it probably can be done.
I'd be more concerned with reduction in vigor of germination. We've seen that really impact stand and susceptibility of those plants to seedling diseases and root rots as well.
All right. I think we've heard from the majority. So it sounds like go forward at your own risk. So run a germination test, but you've heard that a drop in efficacy of several different ways can occur. So be careful. Does anyone have any info on garlic mustard aphid?
Yes, I do. Aphids are my favorite insect, as you guys well know. Yeah, this is a new aphid. Yeah, so garlic mustard is an invasive. This aphid was just found last year, someplace in Ohio, I think like at a garden kind of situation. And I don't know Emily, so this is not a plant question at all. I actually have a bulletin about this aphid that was sent to me. The aphid name was spelled wrong, but I recognized it was spelled wrong. So I've interacted with the folks, and this aphid is very closely related to lip aphis, which would get on beets and some other. So there actually is a survey right now for this garlic mustard aphid because it is it will feed only on garlic mustard and it damages it. So that would be a good thing because garlic mustard is an invasive weed. So if Emily is there, what I may do is try to see if this little fact sheet is online and put the link in there. And I'm looking at all my garlic mustards because I would like to find it in Michigan. I do the aphid IDs a lot of times for the diagnostic clinic. So that's sort of my link to aphids is I'm enjoy them. And I have some information on how to identify this. It's not the only aphid on garlic mustard. So if you do find them, collect them, put them into ethanol, and then get them to the clinic and we can get them identified. So this would be a beneficial aphid, not like a soybean aphid, in other words.
Awesome, Chris. And then for the question previous to that, Clay brought up look into insurance requirements about the seed. So that's a really good point too. Okay, Chris is going to look up the PDF. Lots of interesting information for that seed question. And so I just wanted to back up for a second and let Erin Hill give a quick update about a new resistance. And then we're going to dive into the remainder of the questions live so that they are recorded.
Thanks, Monica. So within the next week or so, I should have a MSUE News article coming out to update any new resistance issues that we found in the diagnostic clinic. One that we found that was a little bit surprising to me because we weren't looking for it was ALS resistance in Johnson grass. So this was resistance to Accent Q, which has the active ingredient nicosulfuron. And I say we weren't looking for that because the Johnson grass samples that came in, this isn't a species we typically work with, but they came in from Indiana. And so when we had these samples come in from Indiana, we needed to have a quote unquote known susceptible for comparison. So we reached out to some of the extension educators and got a sample from St. Joseph County. As it turns out, one of the Indiana samples was ALS resistant, one was not, and the Michigan sample also turned out to be ALS resistant. Now, ALS resistance in Johnson grass isn't new. It's been around the US since about 2000 when they have confirmed it in Texas. And in Indiana, they have saw it as early as 2005. So not something new to the US, but something that we hadn't confirmed before in Michigan. So this and some other information about our resistance screens will be coming out soon.
Great, thank you, Erin. So we'll look forward to seeing that article coming out, and we'll make sure to share it also on the Facebook page and our Twitter page so that it's accessible to everyone who's curious about this new resistance. So I appreciate your time. All right, we're moving up to, we had lots of questions come in as we went over the weather projection. And so one was, how well does drift control agents work and how high of wind conditions can you spray in?
You want me to tackle that one, Erin? So drift reduction agents work pretty well, but it's not gonna let you go up to 20-mile-an-hour winds. Still really important to make sure that you're following those wind restrictions on all those labels. And it's particularly important when you start thinking about some of the dicamba applications that we might make in, whether it's in corn or in some of the extend soybeans. So just keep that in mind. They do make the droplet sizes bigger, but if the wind is blowing, at a pretty high speed, it's still going to drift. So again, just double check those labels. Most of the time, those restrictions go up to 15 miles per hour on most labels, except for, remember, with the dicamba ones, it's quite a bit less. So just keep that in mind.
All right. Thank you, Christy. All right. And now I'm going to move on to, I'm scrolling through. So if I miss your question, please resubmit it and I'll apologize. But I am making through the chat box here. Some of our cover crops have not been terminated in time when planting, especially cereal rye. How should we treat these fields when we are side dressing nitrogen on corn?
Yeah, hey, Monica, that's a good question. One of those things, the first thing to answer or ask is probably how that side dress and application is going to be applied. So if you're going to coulter inject it into the ground, or if it's going to be surface application, wide dropped, et cetera, onto the ground. So if you coulter inject in the ground, oftentimes you can get it below that litter layer, right? And so you can kind of bypass some of that immobilization that can occur. And so you might be okay at your current rate. If it's on the ground, obviously you probably will mix some of that in with some of that residue and tie some of that up. So the adjustment would more likely come with surface apps, then coulter inject. That being said, we have oftentimes upped our side dress rate in these scenarios when we still do coulter inject, and usually somewhere in the ballpark about 20-25 pounds an N. That's worked well with radish. It's worked well with oats. It's worked well with cereal rye, etc. So 2 questions to answer is where you're going to apply it, in the ground or on the ground, and then you can adjust your rate accordingly after that.
Great, thank you.
And remember, this is Chris here. If you have not terminated your cover crop in a timely fashion and you've planted, we had black cutworm 2 weeks ago and then a week again. I had pretty reasonably high catches and they would have colonized that. I know Monica's trap was also high and Jenna's up in the UP. Now mine has fallen off, so that flight's fallen off, but those larvae would be in the field. And then if that cover crop did get terminated or was dying, they could potentially move on to your crop.
Mine was still high this week, actually, Chris.
Okay, well, you're still flying, but the bottom line is there could be larvae out there for
Yeah.
two weeks now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Sidewall compaction, Manny brought that up. It can be detrimental to root growth. So if we're looking at these conditions that Jeff's brought up, or some of you have now, he pasted a link in here about preventing sidewall compaction on field crops. That might be a good read for everybody. And I'll make sure to transfer that also into our social media accounts.
Monica, not everybody has a chance to see those things, so maybe we could answer that live.
There was no question.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, I asked the question, so we have wet soils yet in the southern thumb with heavy clay soils. And so for those that are just planting, should we still be concerned about sidewall compaction was my question.
Yeah, so yeah, I think Monica pretty much read my message in there, but pretty much, I mean, so sidewall compaction, as I said, is never a good thing, right? So we want to avoid that. And again, there's more information in that article, what can be done, how we assess what's the right moisture to plant in, and what are some of the potential planter settings, not using a really high down pressure or using those closing wheels with those spikes, can potentially help with some of those things. One thing I will add on to that is, we are already into the first week of June, right? So this is where we start losing yield at a much higher rate. compared to when we are still in May. Especially, I mean, for both soybeans and corn, I would say the rate of decline is less than 0.5% when we are in May. And once we get into June, it's more than 1% per day. So we probably want to, I think, get our crops in ground here sooner than later. So again, keep an eye on your field conditions and try to again look for some information in that article, what can be done in terms of planter settings. I think someone from University of Nebraska had like some good recommendations, an ag engineer who talked about that. So I think that'll be a good read.
And with that thought, Manny, I have had some farmers that were rushing to plant and have planted in less desirable conditions or right before less desirable conditions are about to hit. And now I'm getting questions about determining replanting. I think I actually sent some pictures to Mike yesterday. I don't know if you happen to get a look at a Mike, but in soybeans specifically, some of these rush plantings, how do we determine if they need to go back through and replant?
Yeah, I think
Manny, I'll take a first stab at it, I guess. It's
sounds good.
There's a lot of rethinking. First of all, we don't totally replant a field.
Mm-hmm.
We're really hesitant to replant a field, tear up what's there, because those plants that are there have some good yield potential. So we don't want to give up on those. So, but it is important to assess your stand. We've got 7 years of yield data where we actually dropped 80,000 seeds per acre and compared that all the way up to 160,000 seeds per acre. Well, those stands and those 80,000 planting rates, some of those are pretty low, down around 50,000, 60,000. And yet the yields were very comparable to the 160,000 planting rates. So that data set, there is an article on MSUE News that talks about that and reviews that data set. The title of the article is that thin soybean stands can produce surprisingly high yields. So look for that on MSUE News. And Monica, maybe we can post that in the chat. But it is interesting. And I have a colleague, Manny and I have a colleague over in Wisconsin that says you can keep a stand at this point in time as low as 50,000 plants per acre. Sean Connolly's recommendation, Manny, was that 50,000 plants per acre at this time of the year. If they were planted timely, if they're relatively uniformly spaced, you can keep that stand without even going back in and interplanting any additional seed. I'm a little more conservative than that. I would use maybe 60,000. Manny, I don't know where you weigh in on that.
Yeah, so I know the article you're talking about, and we do multiple seeding rate trials across even multiple planting times. And what we are seeing again is that the stand will look ugly, like you don't want to be walking that field right now, or you want to be again careful. You're looking for relative uniformity of that stand, right? If there are big holes, that's where the concern is. But we have seen in our data that we can go up to like 60,000. That's a number I feel comfortable with as well, Mike. But it's at least, again, anything above 50,000, again, I think you are, in terms of replanting, you got to be thinking, because there's a delayed planting penalty if we go back now, as I was talking about before, right? So, and there's other cost associated with the replant, right? But if, again, there are those big holes out there, what we haven't done any research, but yeah, Sean has looked into that you go and you interplant. You don't tear the stand up, you go and you interplant in those areas where the stand is really low. And in soybeans, we typically don't have as much competition between plants. So if we plant at different growth stages, they don't really act as a weed. That's a big concern in corn, which is different. Interplanting doesn't really work in corn, but in soybeans that does work. And I think Sean has some data that justifies that decision. And we have a couple of publications. I can even drop an article in the chat box that talks more about that.
All right, great. Thank you so much for that update.
Brooke has his hand up if that's a real hand.
Sorry, I did not see.
Yeah, Manny's kind of said what I was going to say, but most of the observations I've made in these situations are the variability across the field. If you plant too wet, some of the areas of the field are going to be great stands, and some of the areas of the field are going to be terrible. And then you're faced with, well, the ununiformity of the field and how do you address that? And Manny kind of said, like, yeah, if you don't have uniformity, then you probably have to at least address those poor spots, but maybe not the whole field. But it seems like that's very, very common in these situations, is it's only part of the field.
It's exactly the calls I'm getting. And so it sounds like I'll be walking with a hula hoop here in the next day or two to help them out. That's what I'm guessing. All right. So quick question for Jeff. Jeff, do you put out a daily report? Some of these farmers really love what you do, and they're wondering if there's a way they can watch you daily.
Oh, well, thank you. I guess the answer is sort of. We do. I meet with some of the other commodity groups, and so there are reports, I believe now, that go out from the mornings of Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday each week, and that is through our ANR news cycle update through. So the place where it's close to where it's found here, but yes, and I'll try to put that in the chat here in a second, the link with that. So there are some. Oh, and thank you, Mallory's back.
Like a Jeff fan club here. So
perfect. All right. So Dennis, if you're on, given the forecast of showers next week, would you suggest pushing fusarium head blight treatment earlier rather than later? This person's using Marvis Ace, and we are at Feeks 10.3 to 10.4 today.
Feeks, you said 10.3 to 10.4?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I believe the Marvis label allows from 10.3 on. So technically they can, although the best control, and maybe Marty can back me up on this, the best control for head scab is still applied during the flowering timing. That product does allow you to apply earlier, which is nice. It opens the window up a little bit, because sometimes trying to get across all the fields on time with the weather challenges can be difficult. But yeah, no, I would try to hit the timing on that, within 4 days or so after 50% of the heads are showing anthers. Marty, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so in the fungicide timing trial work that we've done, we get better suppression of head scab and vomitoxin when we wait until 10.5.1. So personally, I wouldn't go early unless you knew you're going to be rained out all next week. If you can get across your acres, once we actually hit 10.5.1, that's when I do it. And remember, there's around about a week window from the beginning of flowering, the beginning of 10.5.1. There's about a 1 week window for those fungicide applications to have the best efficacy.
All right. Wonderful, wonderful. The questions are just, they're keeping going here. So there was a question about updates to the carbon market information. Matt, I do have your slides quick if you want me to show them. Otherwise, you're welcome to just say if there's much updates.
Yeah, I'm a little I don't remember what those slides have on it, and I don't remember if they've been updated since the summit or not.
Okay.
But I mean, the big change since the crop summit is probably Corteva getting into the market. So they've launched their new carbon credit program, which includes potential programs for sugar beets, which is kind of new to Michigan, and having carbon credit options for sugar beets. So that's probably the big news. At the federal level, kind of unbelievably almost, we're still in kind of the same spot we were in last year, where it really looks like this bill will eventually pass, but it just hasn't been prioritized. And so kind of still no update there in terms of getting the USDA kind of certifying power over some of these various carbon credit programs. That's probably a good update, but happy to, definitely shoot me an email. We can chat more. I can get you connected with some of the resources we have for that.
There was a Climate Smart Commodity grant that came out to help kind of fund and standardize some of the implementation verification, like on farm. And so there was several proposals submitted in the state of Michigan. And so we hope to learn about those and maybe even have more information or educators working specialists on that topic, maybe in the next month or so. They really didn't tell us when we would get notified, but it was a really quick turnaround. So we hope to hear back quickly too. that would be nice. Okay. Next questions about weeds. 12 to 16 inch mare's tail in various winter annuals. How effective would tillage be at this point, and what other control options exist?
So tillage is probably going to be a little bit difficult depending on how aggressive it is. So the more aggressive it's obviously going to be better, especially with that taller mare's tail. So if you're going to do tillage, you might have to hit it a couple times to get that all ripped up. You have some fairly effective control options as far as sharpen's a good one that you can use prior to planting either corn or soybeans. And again, sharpen or saflufenisols and a lot of the different premixes that we have. And prior to soybeans would be Zidro Pro. There's Verdict that can be used prior to soybeans and corn. There's also some other herbicides. So that's been fairly effective at controlling some of that. And we're rating or evaluating some trials like yesterday and had some pretty good control of mare's tail this year with some of those different products. So just we've got pretty good recommendations in the weed control guide. So look that up. That's also online that you can take a good look at, kind of the fact sheet on controlling mare's tail.
I'd just like to chime in. Christy put a link in the chat box for our weed control tour. It's going to be on June 29th this year. So check that out. Someone just asked that. And then weeds are growing like crazy. So we're going to go out and do our early post treatments on corn. So if you didn't put a pre down, know that those weeds are growing. So we have like anywhere from 2 to 3 inch weeds on campus. So on the corn side, if you didn't put a pre down, make sure your early post plans are soon.
All right, thank you, Aaron and Christy. Should we expect an increase in the fusarium head blight risk with the cool and wet forecast? The risk tool seems glitchy and apparently isn't giving updated maps for 2, 4, and 6 days out.
Yeah, there's been an increase in that risk. The tool is a little bit weird. I just tried to share my screen, but I can't. But yeah, it is showing some slightly elevated risk in the lower portion of the thumb there. So yeah, I mean, if there's moisture around, that's what's going to drive head scab.
You can share now, Marty.
Okay, thanks. So here's the head scab model then. I don't know why it's a little glitchy sometimes, but basically it's showing the same things between, now and like a 6-day forecast. And basically the lower area of the thumb is above that low risk. So it's sort of hitting into that medium. There's a little area of high risk in there as well. So that's what I'd be concerned about for potential head scab development in those areas. And I'm imagining most of that is driven by the moisture that's been received in those areas or potentially forecasted for those areas. So the model is driven by a temperature component and moisture components.
And we are at flowering. We have flowering occurring in the southern part of the state up through most of the central part of the state. And even up into the thumb, we're taking flowering notes at the Saginaw Valley Research and Extension Center. And we're probably about 40% flowered on our trials there at that location right now. So the thumb will not be too far behind on flowering. They got flag leaves out. They're probably in boot stage on much of that weed up there now. So yeah, we want to be paying attention to this head scab risk here, especially with the chances of rain in the forecast next week.
All right, fantastic. I believe I've answered all the questions in the chat box. So is there any other updates from specialists? They've gotten some interesting questions or concerns that in the past week that they'd like to mention.
Monica, I have just one other comment. And this was a result from a conversation I had with a grower. When you go out and scout your fields, make sure you're scouting. If you're not going to scout all your fields, scout at least the varieties of wheat that you have, because I had one person send me a picture of, gosh, my field looks really clean. I think I'm going to skip the fungicide application. I suggested that if you have different varieties planted, go scout the other varieties. Sent me another picture back and had powdery mildew all over in that other variety. And so make sure when you're scouting you're scouting all of the appropriate fields, and particularly when you have different varieties planted, make sure you're looking at the different varieties as well.
That's a great suggestion, Dennis. Thank you for bringing that up.
Monica, I just wanted to add a couple comments to that saved seed story, or the seed treatment and germination. That Iowa study did test treated seed, and they showed that it did drop if it wasn't in a controlled environment, like what Manny had said. And the numbers for a controlled storage environment are 50% temperature, 50% relative humidity, and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're not storing your seed under those conditions, the germination will drop, whether it's treated or untreated, and it can drop significantly. What they found is after 12 months, the germination dropped down to 80%. And then if it wasn't in a controlled environment, and then if it wasn't, and then if they waited 16 months, it dropped down to 20%. So it drops remarkably fast. The other information to think about is what was the quality of the seed going into the year? Like going into this year, we had some lower quality seed than what we usually have. So if it's seed that was planted here or obtained in the 2022 growing season, check your seed tag and see if it was 90% germ or lower quality seed, because that will affect how well it stores as well. The other thing, I guess, is back in 2019, when we had the prevented planting acres, we had over 100,000 units of seed that was saved over the winter, of treated seed that was saved and was tested, and Crop Improvement tested that. They tested 44 lots, and they found the average germination, the warm germination, was 71% in that carryover seed, where the seed that was harvested in 2019 and intended for seed in 2020, the average germ was 97%. So it does drop. Soybean seed is really vulnerable, and it's really, we do not want to save it. The other thing I may have misquoted, I want to make sure and clear up, is that yes, the efficacy of the seed treatments will decline. Even the inoculant will decline in time, but you do not want to retreat. The seed is going to be very fragile if you save it the next year. You do not want to run it through a seed treater again. So if I said something like that before, I was wrong. So.
All right, thank you, Mike. That was a very thorough suggestion or response. I appreciate it. All right, since we are at a point of no more questions, I think we will wrap it up for today.
Monica?
Oh, yes.
There are a couple reminders in the chat. One is that there is a field day for the Michigan Wheat Annual Field Day that'll be held on June 16th at the Saginaw Valley Research and Extension Center. And then we also have our weed tour on campus with Christy and with Aaron and the rest of the weed science team. That will be on June 29th, Wednesday, June 29th. So those are a couple dates that are coming up for people to be involved. We also have a virtual breakfast that same day for the Thursday field day. So you may have to drive fast to get there after watching a virtual breakfast.
I see Clay has his hand raised. Clay, did you have a question?
Yes, please. Going back to the replant of soybeans, do soybeans accelerate as it gets later in the year when they're planted, sort of like corn? Or do you change the relative maturity of the seed that you're going to use to fill in these holes in the field?
Manny, do you want to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Kiddo screaming. So yeah, we have done a lot of work on that, and I think I have an article that I can drop in the chat box. What we are seeing that with soybeans is if we plant anytime in May, we don't need to change the maturity group. Even the first week of June is, I think, a fair bet. But yeah, once we start like going beyond first week of June, that's where we see benefit of actually going to an early maturing or a short, relative maturity group. And that does benefit. We saw a small yield increase, but more so you are able to mature in time and not getting frosted out, right? And get like high moisture and low test weight as a result. So we have seen that in case of soybeans. In corn, it's a little bit of a different story. We have that growing degree day compression phenomena where we plant late. The same hybrid that we plant early will take less number of each units to reach maturity. And we can hedge a little bit in terms of keeping our same maturities. But again, going into June, we need to start thinking about switching. More so in corn compared to soybeans. Let me see if I can.
There's a rule of thumb with planting delays in soybeans. It's kind of a 3 to 1. For every 3 days of planting delays, you only end up with a 1 day of maturity delay. So it's a rough rule of thumb, but that's one to think about, Clay, as you're making that decision. Maturity group actually affects date of maturity than planting date does. Maturity group is a more important effect than planting date on soybeans. But so keep that in mind and add that to Manny's comments when you're making your decision.
Okay, any other questions? Hearing none, thank you for joining us for another virtual breakfast, and we look forward to seeing you bright and early next week.